All right, so we're here with Patrick Lassiter. Patrick, if you want to tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me do this. I'm very excited to talk a little bit about the AP World History course. I teach World History and AP World History in Durham, North Carolina at Research Triangle High School. I just finished my 10th year teaching and 4th year of teaching the AP World History course, and it is by far my absolute favorite course I've ever taught.
Nice.
Been able to teach it a little bit differently every year, and hopefully today be able to share some of that.
Yeah.
Before I was here in Durham, I taught in Northwest Mississippi, and absolutely loved it there as well. But this is now home for me.
Why is this your favorite class to teach?
Oh man. Well, in college, my emphasis was in religious history of the United States and in Middle Eastern history, as well as some gender studies. And when I moved and began teaching, I taught things that were much more U.S. based courses. I even taught like a Mississippi Studies class, which was required for high school students in Mississippi. And that was a fun course, and I always taught it on the backdrop of U.S. history. And then later on, I did some state tested U.S. history things there. And when I moved to North Carolina, I started out in U.S. history. And so I felt I was kind of tired of that subject. I knew it very well, but I wasn't learning a whole lot new. And in the changeover to world history, the last 4 years, it's been nothing but learning for me, which means I can take that and give it to my students. So every year I do things a little differently, still kind of hitting those same themes of history, but learning something new myself, becoming passionate about something different every year. And then I think that gets the students really excited. Yeah,
I had a similar situation, just like doing a lot of U.S. history in college and before I started teaching, and then getting AP World. I remember at first being like, how am I going to do all this? This is so much stuff I've never known before. But learning with kids it's like the most fun way of teaching.
Yeah. And they appreciate it too. When you say, I don't know that, let's go find out. It makes everybody in it together.
And then once you've done it for a couple of years, you're like, I actually know this stuff this time around.
Yeah. I have a joke with my kids whenever we start a new subject, especially at the beginning of the year when it's been so far. You go back to periods 2 and 3, and I tell them, I knew this last year. You're going to have to give me a minute to relearn it. And it always goes in crazy directions.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay. So obviously we're in the middle of quite a dramatic moment for AP World. And, College Board's reasoning for cutting this class is that they've heard that teachers are overwhelmed by all the content. And, when I heard that at first, I was like, oh, that makes sense. It is a lot. It's 10,000 years. I know teachers are like, you don't want to miss something that might be on the test. And so I think for this conversation, I think it's really important for us to show teachers how you can just really see the scope of AP World and organize it in a way that isn't overwhelming for you and is intuitive for students. And so, how might you start those thoughts in your head, as you're preparing for your year, how do you go about approaching this course?
Yeah, I agree that it was overwhelming. The first year I taught this, I did it without going to an APSI. I kind of jumped in. I picked a textbook that I knew I could get easily and cheaply for my students. And I kind of used that as my guide, not understanding much more beyond those first few pages that you get in your little green, or at least last year it was green book that says, what you should be doing for AP World. And, so I tried my best to pace out the year as I could, but I was really just at the whim of my textbook, trying to, get through a chapter or two every couple of weeks. And that was definitely overwhelming. But that year, I had learned a lot of history, but not necessarily the history that was needed for my students on the test. And we spent a lot more time in content and in the weeds with a lot of content, and certainly not as much time on the skills that my students needed for the test. And so going into the second year, I had a lot better understanding. I went to an APSI. I took a calendar out literally and said, I'm going to pace out my year and I'm going to stick to it. Now, that's what I say at the start of every year. I'm going to pace out my year and I'm going to stick to it. And I will say that this year is the only year I've been able to stick to it to the day.
Wow.
So I usually start with trying to get just a grip on the year. And it seems painful up front to do it, but it's actually quite relaxing, and it's a good way to try to tame what you're going to come to this year. And so I get a full year for my course, and obviously if teachers are teaching it on a block schedule, it's going to be a little bit different. And we start actually in early August, which gives us a leg up from some schools that start after Labor Day. But what I try to do is first understand the course breakdown. You have 6 time periods, and they are a certain percentage of the test. Time period 1, where you can get really bogged down because it is 8 or so thousand years of history, it's only 5% of the exam. And I mapped it out last year. I had 160 days of teaching days before the AP exam. I knew I wanted 2 weeks at minimum for review. So those are 10 days gone. I had 150 days to play with. So I literally on a calendar mapped out 7 days or 5% of the course for period 1, 23 days or 15% of the course for period 2, and periods 3 through 6 were 30 days each. That's how many days of classroom instruction I would have to teach each of these units. If I wanted to stick very closely to what the AP suggested percentage is. And in that way, I know at least from the start that I'm putting emphasis in the right place in time in terms of chronology, right?
Right.
Now, there's a lot of variables in that. How much time do you want to review at the end of the year? Do you take breaks from the content in introducing your essays? I know some teachers do like DBQ boot camps, and that'll be a week or 2 weeks out of their course. And so there's a lot of leeway there. But it starts with me just literally printing out my calendar and counting my days off, and knowing exactly how much I wanted to spend in each section. And for me, that starts off by saying, all right, now I have a framework. Now I know I have 30 days to teach 600 to 1450 and somehow teach writing and multiple choice questions, strategies, and all that in that range. And so that's the first thing I do every year. Beyond that, you then have the question of like, how do you make it all fit, right? So my school is built, and one of the things that attracted me to the school was it was built on the flipped model. And so like you and like many other teachers, there's a lot of really great flipped content. I like to make my own. And I've shared a lot of those videos online with some resources. So that allows me to take care of some of the extra stuff throughout the year. I know that in 30 days, 30 classroom days, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, even in the key concepts. So if I don't have time to cover a specific topic, you have a video that you can work in. And you build that video library over years, not in a single year. You want to introduce a concept for a skill-based activity in class, well, then you can use a video. You can use we are in AP required to have some sort of textbook, and there are a lot of really great ones out there. I use Strayer, and I use the Perfection Learning AMSCO book as a supplement. There are some really creative ways to use the textbook to supplement that information. What that means is you're putting a lot more on students, which I let students know up front, so to try to keep them from being so overwhelmed. So I try to build in some catch-up time throughout the year for them as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I get started in the year, understanding that 1, I have to pace it out and stick to it, and 2, I have to build in some supports to this time constraint, which I've already set for myself at the start of the year.
Yeah. And then, okay, so let's say, we have our whole year, you divide out your days, you plugged in things, and now you're looking at period 1 in 7 days.
Yeah.
So how do you do period 1 and 7? Like, you know, like you say, 8,000 years. So that I know is definitely what trips up a lot of teachers is period 1, period 2. So in your schedule, you've got period 1, period 2 done in a month.
Yeah.
So like, what might like a unit look like for you? Like, how might you look at the key concepts? Do you use the textbook mostly? Or, you know, do you loop in the essays? What might a unit look like for you?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is I introduce the key concepts right off the bat. So on the first day of a unit, and if it is between units, maybe after we go over the test, we'll jump into our next unit. I just, here's the start from the beginning. And I have the students look at the key concepts themselves so they get an overview of what we're going to do. And usually this is like some kind of scavenger hunt bonus point activity for me. I try to make it as fun as possible. But it gives them just an idea of where we're going. Of course, that goes along with the discussion of periodization. I know they've taken that skill away from the test, but I think it's vital. You know, why we choose to start history at a certain date and why we choose to end time periods at another date.
Yeah.
So we have those discussions. And so I kind of start off with that grand overview, I'd like to say. From there, it does depend on the unit. For Unit 1, and really Unit 4 as well, I teach the key concepts in order. I have a luxury. A lot of my students get world history 2 years in a row. We have a 9th grade world history course, which covers all of world history. It's kind of odd for most states, I think, to have that course. And then some of our students go into AP World History for a 2nd year. So they have a general idea of chronology when they come into me. So I have that luxury. I think if I didn't, and for the students, especially some of the freshmen I have in my course who don't have that, I spend some time talking about that chronology up front.
So you just kind of give them like big picture look at like all of it.
Yeah, let's look at a map. What's going on in this area? What's going on in this area? And that general overview. This is where we're going to start. This is where we're going to end. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens in the middle.
Yeah.
For Unit 1, though, there's not a whole lot. I mean, if you look at the key concepts, it is pretty small. There aren't a lot of illustrative examples. So I cover it. You know, we go through key concept 1.1. We talk about like whether or not farming was a mistake. You know, we use that great Jared Diamond article, you know, Worst Mistake in Human History, and we build a discussion around that. You know, that's 2 days basically. Then we get into key concept 1.2, and that looks primarily at not just the dawn of the Paleolithic era, but how humans learn to adapt to this kind of more agricultural lifestyle, how we develop more complex economic and social systems. And knowing that, and I guess I should say also, you know, knowing that Unit 1 is not going to be the sole topic of an essay, I don't bother introducing LEQs or DBQs in the first unit. I will introduce an SAQ, however. And so you spend one day on key concept 1.2, really trying to get into it and discuss it. And I would say I use a little bit more lecture to start the year and then wean the kids off of that as I make them more responsible for the content. So yeah, we look at SAQs. So they'll go home at night, they'll watch a video on what the SAQ is. The next day we come in and we start practicing. And then we get into key concept 1.3, where they're being asked to look at the emergence of core civilizations. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to teach every single core civilization. You don't have to teach, you know, Egypt and India and China and Mesopotamia. In fact, I have borrowed, as we have this kind of great sharing community in AP World, an activity that just only looks at the Indus River Valley. And so that's the one I choose to teach. Students have to know the locations of the others. They have to know that these things existed and that many of the developments that we're talking about in India were happening elsewhere. But I'm not spending a day on Egypt, a day on India, a day on China, a day on Mesopotamia, or, well, Mesopotamia could really take like a whole course, but
right.
So it's really just having to stay focused. So we spend some time in discussion on that, and then we go back to our skill the next day, the SAQ.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that means in 6 days, or I guess by the 7th day, I've introduced the overview of the unit. We've looked at the decision to farm. Decision, I guess, should be in quotes there. Yeah. the development of farming. We've looked at the development of humans adapting to their climates, the development of civilization, and then we've also worked in a skill, one of the basic skills, I would say, of the course, which is SAQ writing, although there are many different skills that factor into that we go into throughout the year. And that's about 7 days.
Yeah.
And then we test on it. And if I do a better job next year, we won't go into that 8th day, which means you're already behind.
Yeah, that's what makes it hard, right? Is that you hit a point, especially later in the year too. Like for me, it was always around unit 3 that the kids would be like, "Oh, can we just take a break? Like, please, one day off." Mm-hmm. Be like, "I can't. I literally only have this many days for period 3."
Yeah, and the kids understand that urgency. I think they like that challenge. Mm-hmm. But I always hang that carrot of when we're done with the test, there's a break, and I make sure and obviously I have my principal supports. After the test, they do get a break. We watch some movies. They have to write a little bit about them, but nevertheless, there's still some movie watching. Yeah. But yeah, that it's put off, and it hits the ground running. And unit 1 is so fascinating. It's absolutely, or period 1 is so fascinating and interesting. Mm-hmm. Because there's so much scholarship always coming out about it, and you can pull articles from all over the place. Sure. But if you look at the key concepts directly, there are some very specific trends that are easily identifiable. Very specific trends that if you can identify it in one civilization, you can identify it in others. Mm-hmm. And if you get to the test and you have a document talking about Mesopotamia and we talked about India, well, students can still identify that trend and hopefully make those connections. And if they can at the start of the year, hopefully as the year goes on, they become better and better at it.
For sure. Yeah. I think actually it's pretty useful to just sort of talk through each time period and just how you might organize it. I know that the conversation for the later ones might get a little longer, but yeah. For period 2, I think one of the challenges is in period 2, it feels a lot more there's all the different empires, and then there's the different religions, and then there's the different trade networks. And I think you could organize period 2 in a very kind of choppy way. And I think that would then take a long time, especially in some of the textbooks that spend an entire chapter on each of the empires. Yeah. So how do you approach period 2?
Period 2, I approach in, I would say, a chronological way, more so. So I again, make sure that I know the key concepts and make sure the students know them. And I would say most teachers like that chronology, right? Mm-hmm. This happened in this year, this happened this year. But it's in period 2 where you don't see we don't have a truly global network, right? So you're still dealing with areas mostly in geographic pockets until we really see that Silk Road develop. So I cover it chronologically, but geographically and chronologically. So we look at the Mediterranean region, and we look at the Middle East, and we look at China, and we look at India. And then when we can, as you add on each geographic region, you can build kind of bridges between them, connections between each region, and say, all right, there's trade between these two regions. What do we know what was happening in China at this time when this is happening in the Roman Empire? And as you go through, you can kind of revisit those geographic areas that you've already covered.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say more so geographically is how I cover it.
Yeah.
There are a lot, and I think this gets into one of the questions of, at what point in this course where we're teaching something with so much breadth and not a whole lot of depth, right? How do you get that depth in this course? A lot of people turn to projects, and period 2 is probably the place for one of, I think, the most effective projects that's out there, that's shared by a lot of AP history teachers. And I wish I knew that. I don't know the teacher's name that started it, but it's the Autopsy of an Empire project. I know a lot of teachers that do this, and I think it is one of the most effective projects that's shared among the AP community, because it allows students to look in depth at one of these classical civilizations. And they don't have to study every single thing that happened in every civilization to understand the things that lead to the growth and development of empires, their methods of governance, which I think is always very important to know, and then the things that weaken these empires. They can go in depth in one of those. Hopefully something that interests them, but also something that challenges them. You don't want everybody just doing Rome. By the time they get to 9th grade, they've watched whatever the History Channel has left on it to talk about Rome. But man, they can get into like the Gupta Empire. They can get into Han China. And this might be the first time they've ever looked at these civilizations before. And there's just a lot of things that are rich about that project. And then when they see each other's projects, they can identify, all right, this trend happened here and here and here. But they weren't spending 4 weeks, again, learning about each place in isolation.
Right.
There are other projects too out there, but I think, you can get bogged down in projects as well, which can of course destroy pacing for a course. So I'd say if you're creating a project on your own or you're using one, make sure that it's going to cover a lot of key concepts, relevant key concepts, and in the depth that you want. And of course, you want to make sure kind of students are doing a lot of different topics so they can then share their understanding.
And too, that they're connected to the like historical thinking skills, because it would be so easy to get to, give kids some research project in period 2, but that can really like push them off the like what's really important, right? And so that's another like big thing that I would tell my students all the time, like only use the textbook, only use like the key concepts, only use these things, because if you start to look at Wikipedia on Rome, you're going to be looking at a whole bunch of details you do not need to know.
Yeah, and along with those historical thinking skills, the College Board, I guess a couple years ago, came out, of course, with our like thematic learning objectives, which are fantastic, I think, for really honing in on those important themes. I mean, already the 5 themes of AP World History are really important. And a lot of times when I have students do independent research, I have them organize that research by theme. But even if you're thinking about like creating short answer questions or LEQs or even DBQs, or just your multiple choice questions, those thematic learning objectives also play into that. But again, that all can be very overwhelming if this is your first time teaching the course.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like with period 2, it's a really good time to introduce comparisons. Especially if you just keep doing like short answer questions. It doesn't have to even be an entire essay, entire LEQ yet. But for them, like, if you do the autopsy project and then you have kids compare their empire to someone else's, that can be a really good conversation in class, something that I've done before.
Exactly. I think, period 2 for comparison, when you get into periods 3 and 4, then you can start working in that change of continuity over time a little bit
Right.
more. Causation is a really great one to use in period 4, especially because there are some really great causal links. Although, I mean, you could use it in period 1, but that's kind of the last type of essay I introduce, and it usually comes about period 4, right before Christmas.
For sure. Okay, so period 1, check. Period 2, check. So now it's, November, December, October. I don't know. At what point in the year are you on period 3? I guess October.
I think I start period 3 in September or October. I could actually, last year it was, so I do a weird thing, and something that's really helped, and I got from Jonathan Henderson, who's one of the great AP gurus right now doing all the AP Summer Institutes. He keeps track of his days day by day, and so I do the same thing. And looking back, it was looks like I started 2 years ago on day 34 with period 3. So wherever that puts me, probably late September or October.
Wow.
Yeah, time period 3. So this one is tough. Because this is where history is really speeding up for these kids. It's no longer just these old things. Everything that starts to happen from the rise of Islam 1, I think you can make some really quick dots to the present day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 600 to 1450. There's so much history in there. But I mean, if you just think about China, for example, you go through the Sui dynasty, which I guess straddles time periods 2 and 3, the Tang, the Song, the Yuan, the Ming, right? I'm not missing one, I hope. The Ming dynasty. It's like 5 dynasties in China in that 800 years or so of history. And this is the unit, I think, that really shocks kids when they get to time period 3. In covering it myself, I usually start with what is the most important event. I start with the rise of Islam, and we stay on that topic for, I would say, probably an inordinate amount of time. If I think about how much time I spend on individual religions or individual places in any time period, the amount of time I spend on the birth and growth of the Islamic world in time period 3 probably gets a greater share.
Yeah.
That's partially my background, but partially I just think it's so rich. And so we start there. We start with this is what the Arabian Peninsula looked like at the dawn of this time period. This is what the birth of Islam looked like. And then we can start making those connections as these caliphates grow. We start talking about trade and the importance of trade in the world at the time period. And from there, it just opens up the possibilities of talking about so many cross-cultural interactions. It just gets real fun after that.
Yeah.
But there are, period 3, key concept-wise, is it's pretty in-depth. And so that's why I think that the key concepts and the illustrative examples that are given are extremely valuable. I'll give an example that I prepared coming into this, which is looking at key concepts in period 3. Key concept 3.1, Roman numeral 3, point B, okay? So we're getting real down there.
Yeah.
It says in key places along important trade routes, merchants set up diasporic communities where they introduce their own cultural traditions into the indigenous culture, right? So this is all about cross-cultural interaction. And trade happening now. People are moving around and bringing their culture with them. You could spend 30 days on that idea, but it's just not feasible.
Right.
And as a teacher, that first year I was teaching the course, I thought, man, I have to mention every one of these. I've got to talk about everything. My textbook talks about them all. Do the kids really understand each of these individual examples? And now I just talk about Muslim merchant communities in the Indian Ocean. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And I actually, like in my videos I do that review these key concepts, key concept 3.1, like I mention all of them, but it's more like your teacher may have told you about this, or they may have told you about this or this. It's all the same trend. If you know one of these well, you'll be fine.
Right.
So those, just knowing that if you can teach one of those things well, and it can be through lecture, which may or may not be right for your class. It can be through a multiple choice question that has a really rich primary source. It could be a short answer question that has just maybe like a great piece of artwork. It could be in groups working through an essay using their textbook as a resource, any of those things. But if you can just teach one of these well, then it will, and the students understand the connection to the trends and the key concepts, then you can move on. And you don't have to teach Sogdian merchant communities throughout Central Asia. Although part of me really wants to teach that this year, and instead, because I was reading a little bit more about them recently. So, you know, that's where the kind of the fun of the course comes in. But you just have to admit to yourself as a teacher, there's not enough time for it all. Pick what you find interesting this year. And attack it.
Yeah. And actually to that point too, I think, you know, teachers gravitate to what they know and teach the things that maybe they've learned more in the past. And then you learn something new and you're like, oh, I should do that one. And so letting yourself like adapt with the course and learn, and, you know, whatever you did one year, you don't have to do the exact same the next year. But I think for period 3, I think the change over time is a really good conversation, especially in the trade routes, right? So like we did a lot in my class just about talking about what changed, what stayed the same in any of the trade routes. And then you can almost like go into like causation because of, you know, the trade routes. Then you end up in this like spiral of historical thinking skills.
Well, and the way the new LEQs are written, I mean, students can approach them from multiple historical thinking skills.
Right.
So that makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, you know, change is really easy to point out during, and then when you get to the end of a unit, really a great challenge is the continuities. Students are so used to identifying changes that sometimes they forget that so many of these cultural elements stay the same, or so many of the items that are being traded stay the same, or the importance of communities along these routes stay the same.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so period 3, super fun to teach. I really hope it sticks around in this course.
We're all hoping. It's a fun one.
For sure. And then you cut into period 4, and with period 4, this is like, it is a huge moment in world history. David Christian kind of mentioned this like big history concept that I had kind of forgotten about, and I'm happy to like have it back. It's the idea of world zones. So like first 3 time periods, it's like humans are, you know, developing almost in their own planets. They don't necessarily totally connect with each other, at least not all of them. And then by period 4, it's all connected. And so period 4 provides like a whole new set of like, you know, ideas to teach that haven't really come about before. And so how do you approach period 4?
So period 4 is one where I kind of revisit the method I used in period 1. I teach period 4 in the order that key concepts presents the information as best I can. There are a couple areas where we might step out, but the key concept 4.1 right off the bat does a really nice job of walking through the causes and effects of this age of exploration, which leads to our global experience. Of course, let me just say, we have to have the context for all this, really, to understand the moment. And so there's my plug for keeping period 3, of course. But it does a really good job of walking through it. And so I use the key concepts from period 4 to really set my lesson plans. For example, I have activities that my kids kind of get tired of, I guess, that are like the title of, you had your title of whatever the activity is for the day or the research is for the day. And mine are just like key concept 4.1, Roman numeral 1B, like that's it.
Yeah.
But so an example of one would be like key concept 4.1 Roman numeral 2A, which is the developments and the production of new tools helped to generate this transoceanic travel and made this trade possible. Mm-hmm. And, you have these illustrative examples of different ship designs. Then you have to understand like knowledge of wind current patterns, new map making techniques, and the astrolabe and compass. And so you take that key concept, right, and you jigsaw it. It's not I wouldn't say that I am innovative in my teaching styles. I beg, borrow, and steal, and I use what I find to just be tried and true methods, and I use them over and over again. So I just jigsaw it out, and each group researches one of these different technologies, and they spend some time in class doing that. They gather the information, they look at where the technology came from, how it was used, in this case in Europe, what it meant for trade, and how it created more trade. And then we come back together and tell each other all about it. And it's an interactive day. You could do it with stations if you wanted. But at the end of that day, I have that key concept done, and they have this idea. And ideally, in that conversation, you can say, now, where else have we seen this throughout history?
Right.
And I pray that they are able to say, well, the use of stirrups in the steppe lands of Central Asia, and the use of the camel saddle in the Middle East and North Africa. And so they can make more of those connections. And then the next day we move on. We go to our next key concept, right? Which looks at individual countries, I guess, Portugal, Spain, and what their trade and voyages of exploration look like. Yeah.
And then you got the whole Columbian Exchange, which is super fun.
The Columbian Exchange is one of those that is so vitally important to teach. And being that I teach a 9th grade world history course, it's one that I get really tired of teaching. Yeah. And so I find by AP, I end up kind of farming that out to my students. We do some sort of, student research presentations on it. But again, it's easy to lose time in that Columbian Exchange.
Yep.
So
it's
a fun one.
It's good to focus there too on like the effects, and then you can like compare the effects in different regions. And one of the big things is like when, kids learn about the different population changes. And for us, we do 9th grade as AP Human Geography. And so that's a nice like tie-in for us with population.
Yeah, demographic changes are something that I spent a lot more time on this year. And I expected it to pay off with like, an LEQ specifically about that. Didn't happen, but maybe one day. Because, the Eurocentric model of teaching world history has always been, Europeans arrived and the Native American populations die out. That's pretty much like the only demographic change that students really are able to latch on to. And then you bring in like, well, look at the effects of new foods brought back on the populations of sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
Look at the effect of that in China, for example. And of course in Europe too, with population growth, which will play into later on the Industrial Revolution coming about as people move to cities. And there's just so many, far-reaching effects of that Columbian Exchange.
Yeah, I think period 3 works really well chronologically, and it also works well sort of geographically, just to sort of like connect all the things that are kind of happening. I think period 3 is also when kids can kind of get overwhelmed and a little bit like lost and like, wait, what? But like, who's doing this? And what's going on? And so I definitely try to like give them a story to attach to. But yeah. Do you do any projects in period 3?
Period 3, my projects, period 3 or period 4?
Oh, sorry, period 4.
Period 4, most of our projects there are DBQ related. I vowed this coming school year to start my DBQ much earlier, but last year I started in period 4 before Christmas. And I used the silver trade DBQ to look at the effects of this new global network. And so I kind of built that as a project. Where we spent some time with document analysis and responding to the question one way, then going back and responding to it another way, and then a third way, and kind of piecing it together with, our contextualization and then our thesis writing and trying to give a lot of feedback along the way. So I think that's where I spent more of my time, project-wise, other than writing or the overarching project for the year, which is pass the AP exam. There wasn't anything in particular, I believe, in this unit. There was some group presentations on, we looked at, of course, pre-Columbian American civilizations and that, but those are mini projects. I wouldn't say a big one.
Yeah. All right. So period 5 is the only one with 4 different key concepts in it.
Yeah.
So I know period 5 is definitely where you can get bogged down. So how do you approach period 5?
So period 5, I approach as if it was different units, really. We start out, I'm trying to remember how I start out. If I started with, I think I start with the colonial changes, the revolutions, I want to say the Enlightenment. So I start there. In some years, I've started with the Industrial Revolution, which I think is actually key concept 5.1. But I just skipped over that over the last couple of years. So we start with the Enlightenment, trying to understand how we can see, at least in the Atlantic, a different world developing around 1750. And we go through revolutions. It's a really great place. As one of the things I think this course is weak in is, and of course this might just be a lot of mainstream world history, it is weak in very specific examples of women's history and women's rights. If you dig in, you can find some good anecdotal evidence in kind of our earlier time periods. Yeah. But usually it's kind of cursory treatments. Women were important in trade in Indian Ocean cities, right? Or in some of these communities, richer women had more of a say, all this stuff. When you get into the Enlightenment, you can really get into the importance of the development of women's rights. I spent a lot of time with Olympe de Gouges, which my kids really enjoy. It basically forms like the basis of a whole group discussion, and it's really a lot of fun watching my students, especially my young women in class, really like get into that. So that's what makes, I think, some of the more recent stuff fantastic. But I wish if they do go back and revise the key concepts, keep all the time periods, of course, but we need certainly some more specific guidance, I think, for women's history. And more representation there. But so we anyways go into this. So I start with this Enlightenment and revolutions, and I don't want to say compartmentalize it, but I do a little bit. This is what's going on that signals a new time period. If you think about trade changes and trade policy changes in Britain, it fits with the loss of the American colonies. It fits with the rise of the Industrial Revolution. So we move then into our Industrial Revolution part of the unit. And really kind of deal with that on its own. And from there, you have to, you've covered the two big, I would say more Eurocentric portions of period 5 in those two things, at least the Western hemisphere and Europe. Then you can go out and look, all right, what did this mean for the rest of the world? And that's where I usually go back to my geographic organization of a unit, right? We look at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa specifically, and say, all right, what did all of these changes mean in sub-Saharan Africa? in this time period? What do these mean for India? What do these mean for China? What do these mean for, you know, the Middle East and Ottoman Empire in a time, because, you know, we didn't talk about them when we were discussing period 4 here, but that is so vital into the causes of European exploration, is the rise of this Ottoman Empire.
Right.
So what was going on in these places that were seemingly falling behind and searching for ways to reform or catch up to what was going on in Napoleon's Europe, right? And so that's kind of the third portion of that unit for me. And that gets through most of the rest of the key concepts, except 5.4, which is this kind of dangling key concept dealing with migrations around the world.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing I cover in it.
Yep.
And if I've done my job with key concepts 5.1, 2, and 3, then when we talk about key concept 5.4, it's easy for students to kind of say, oh, of course people were migrating because steamships were coming around and it was much easier. Of course people were moving to the urban areas for this reason because of industrialization. And hopefully it starts to let them see how truly interconnected this time period was, even though I have kind of dealt with it compartmentally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think period 5, in terms of like ways that the key concepts could improve, is like one that I would like stick to in ways to try to, if the key concepts were more global in each of them, you know, but I think you're right in like how you divide it out. And the migrations piece becomes really easy. The push and pull factors, kids are like, yeah, of course. Yeah. Period 5 is super fun to teach for sure.
It is. It's definitely one where in years past I took time away from period 6, and you know, going forward, if I have to take time out of anything, it'll probably be out of period 4 from here on. And I already kind of take time from period 4 because I spend much more time with DBQ specific skills, and we may not always deal with period 4 in those, but period 5 it's a beast. And I say, I don't subdivide my periods and give multiple tests, but if you're gonna do that for some time period, I think period 5's where that would go.
For sure. All right, so hitting the last time period, period 6. I think a lot of teachers like love getting to period 6. 20th century is like my favorite time to teach personally. But it can also be, it's a ton of stuff. And at this point now, if you stayed on track, you still only have, you know, not that long to cover it. And this is when a lot of teachers hit this and they're like, I did not stay on track and now I'm running out of time. So how do you organize period 6?
This is the one that because we're at a global world here, right? And ideally, if I have done my job and I've stayed doing what I try to do throughout all of these units, when I get to period 6, students should, I hate to say should, I hope that students understand now how interconnected everything is, right? Even though we take things kind of piecemeal, and by the end of every unit, I try to show them the connections. By time period 6, we're close to the end of the year. We've worked on these skills. Hopefully they can go at it. I teach period 6 almost entirely chronologically. Yeah. With maybe a little break out of chronology to talk about China and developments in China. But, you know, this is what's happening in the beginning of the time period. This is what's happening in World War I. This is the interwar period in all of our different regions. This is World War II. This is decolonization in all our different regions. This is what was going on in China and Russia during that time. And you can have a lot of comparison there. But I would say period 6, I teach mostly chronologically, which I train my students so much to like think about key concepts. Then we get to time period 6, and I teach it very much chronologically. I'm like, what key concept is this? I'm like, well, it's 6.3, whatever. And they're like, well, what were you on 6.1 yesterday? I was like, yeah. This is one where I jump around a lot. And it's, the key concepts though are important for this time period. Because if you look closely at them, the cause and effect of world wars are important, not the events of world wars, right? New technologies in these are important, not what happened at the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're a military historian, which I am not, that's going to really hurt what you want to do for the course.
Right.
But if you think about what's best for students in terms of taking this test and getting them credit for and saving them money in college and having them well prepared, those things are not quite as important as has been said by the College Board. What is in the key concepts and what is on the test is what we deem important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said that very well, the AP reading.
Yeah.
So I focus on those things, but also in time period 6, the illustrative examples are vitally important, especially when we get into decolonization.
Yep.
There are some very specific areas of the world that you can look at in depth and have a good idea of the different ways that decolonization goes, whether it's peaceful negotiation or whether it was armed struggle or whether it's ongoing struggle. Whether you have people displaced by decolonization efforts of the development of new states. There are a lot of things you can teach, and you don't have to teach every single one of them to get it across. So choose what you're interested in or what your children are most interested in. I mean, let them, be the deciding factor. We have something we can do on India or South Africa. What do we want to do tomorrow? And maybe they choose India, maybe they choose South Africa.
Yeah.
Building in that flexibility, but knowing that you don't have to teach every little thing. It's freeing once you go through a year doing it that way.
For sure. Yeah. And to your point on the world wars, I think that's so important because I know so many teachers will look at, either World War and then see it in AP and think like, I'm going to do World War I in like a week or less. Like how... And it's just like, I would be like, here's the lead up and then after the war, like just skip the whole war basically, with the exception of just like who's on which side and then move on.
Mm-hmm. And I've had, and everybody has those students that just, they wait for the day you get to those wars.
Yeah.
Or certain topics in history, and they can't wait till you get there and they're like, man, I wish we spent a lot more time. I knew so much about this, I could share it. And I end up having to make the point, if you know about it already, then you're good to go.
Right.
We need to focus on maybe those things in history that you haven't been exposed to yet,
right.
or using what you already know to build a skill in which you're lacking. Because whereas I know most of the time here we've been talking about how to present this content because it is so much content. The important thing to remember is if you stick to those key concepts and you stick to your pacing, you are building time, you're taking time away from the content really.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're being more targeted, more focused, and you're building time for those skill-based activities, which is really what the kids need most.
Right.
I think we can all acknowledge that, our students are pretty good at learning information. They're not so great at doing history. Right? Doing the skills that historians do, those critical thinking skills that are vital, not just in our course, but in any course. I mean, we can help English teachers with this, with the writing and critical thinking. We can help science teachers when they're having students trying to design experiments, right?
Right.
Through really emphasizing the skills in our course.
Yeah, and I think the skills are what make our students able to think about like current events, right? And like for them to look at any like current issue and know how change over time works, know how causation works. And instead of just like assuming things about current issues, they start to like unpack them. And what, at the end of this course, I think that's like the coolest time is at the end in period 6. And then after the exam, when kids have like, they've seen the whole thing and now they're kind of like, oh, okay. So now when I'm looking at what's going on today in, you know, fill in the blank, it makes more sense and I can understand it more and I can think about how to solve it better.
Yeah, I mean, most of these students in their courses don't understand how China can become a world leader today.
Right.
How did that happen if, you know, Britain decimated them and then they had these years of disaster with Mao's Great Leap Forward, and then you bring in Deng Xiaoping and special economic zones, and you point out to them that throughout history, China was the world leader.
Right.
That's not going to change. Like they might go away for a little bit, they always come back. So why is China on everybody's tongues in the news every single day? Because it's history happening again. They're on the path to back on top. You know? It's fun to have them see those connections.
For sure. So all right, so just to like, you know, wrap it all up. Two questions. One, what's your favorite time period to teach?
Period 3, without a doubt. I don't want to say not periods 1 and 2 because I have a ton of fun with those.
Right.
And personally, I think they should also stick around, say periods 1, 2, and 3, right?
Yeah.
But period 3 is just so fun. I absolutely love teaching the rise of Islam because most students do not get that background in their courses coming into this class. There's so much happening in China. There's so much cross-cultural interaction that just really forms the basis of everything that comes after it. It's also one of those time periods because students don't know so much, you can just surprise them again and again.
Yeah.
And you have the Mongols, of course, with it all too.
Yeah.
Like, they're icing on the cake. They used to be the reason why I like the time period. And now they're just another in the great line of things to talk about. But I think personally, my interests, the rise and spread of the Islamic world is what gets me excited. And I start right off the bat with that. So we have a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think for any teacher, like especially if they're new to this class, just finding something that just makes you super excited to talk about. Like it's so powerful for kids to see us just like, you know, you get so like nerdy about things, but it like, I don't know, it fuels them too. That makes
it that much more difficult to teach the course because there are some things that you just have to say, I love this.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to teach, but you know what? The ins and outs of the French Revolution isn't the meat and potatoes of the course.
Right.
There are other things throughout history. You know, we have to look at Southeast Asian decolonization movements because that is an important part of our global history.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun.
For sure. So do you have any last advice for teachers who are maybe in their first year or 2 or 3 years that are still feeling like, how do I handle all this?
Yeah. So first of all, know that it is a continuous process.
Yeah.
I keep track of what I do day to day and I revise it every single year. This is only my 4th year teaching the course. I'm still getting better at it. I'm eagerly awaiting my in-depth score report so I can start tweaking for next year.
Yeah.
But I will say ever since I started teaching in this way, really focusing on these key concepts, I saw a massive jump in scores. And if you're at a school that puts a lot of emphasis on AP scores, I think you will see a lot of progress. My school does not. I mean, I have this incredibly supportive principal, but he wants to see the skills in students grow, not necessarily just their scores on tests. But it is a continuous process. Each year I cut in some places and I add in others. Every year I teach the course, I lecture a little bit less and spend more time on skills. I am not at my goal, I would say, of maybe like the 1 day a week lecture or maybe half a day a week. That would be ideal. But it's a constantly evolving thing. You get to know these key concepts more and more intimately, and you can communicate those to students in better ways. The most fun thing to do, though, is to just go through something you taught one way one year and just think about, how can I teach this differently, more interactively? How could I teach this through a writing or skill building activity? And when you find those and the kids latch onto it, it becomes a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I would say too, to like do those reflections throughout the year. There was one year that we were actually like really on top of that, and after every like few weeks, we would just think, okay, like how could we have done any of those things better? And it was so valuable, you know, over the summer. And we're like, wait, what did we do for that again? So,
I do that. I try to do it weekly. I keep track of everything day by day, but then you go back and you say, all right, I can reorganize this some way. But again, it's not a 1 year process. You're building up for years to come. This is a great way to get started, though, I think. And it's kind of by just holding yourself accountable to that information or to those key concepts. And
for sure.
It changed the way I approached the course and made it much more manageable for me.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing, you know, what you do throughout the year. I think this is going to be really valuable for teachers to see and, you know, map out, and we'll share all these resources as well. Anything, you know, we'll share them as part of this. But thank you for willing to do this.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda.